Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many, many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts, especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and more across a spectrum of ages, genders, and cultures to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts and get the sex ed we wish we'd gotten. What happens when you take Christian patriarchy to the extreme, at least in the U.S.? You end up with the violent, dangerous fundamentalism that Tia Levings fled literally for her life and her children's. Tia became a best-selling author chronicling her religious, domestic, and sexual abuse in her 2024 memoir, A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. This year, she published I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma. In it, she explains how she sought and received professional help since her escape, along the way reclaiming her body, her voice, her very sense of self. I met Tia in May when a friend took me to see her speak at Parnassus Books in Nashville. My friend also grew up in a high-control religious sect and, like Tia, has been working to deconstruct the profound damage done in the name of the Lord. I've just recently learned these terms, high-control religion, deconstruction, as more and more survivors dismantle and speak out about their religious trauma. They've helped me understand that religious abuse is like the high-control dynamics of domestic or intimate partner violence that I report on, but on steroids. All abuse is based on power, control, and supremacy. It just varies in scale. A domestic abuser exerts it over their family, an abusive boss over employees or workplace. Widen the scale further, and you can subjugate entire congregations or a nation. Abuse is predicated on stripping people of their intellectual, emotional, and physical autonomy and punishing any critical thinking. And when you teach people that an unseen force wants half the world to submit to themselves to the other half, it should be obvious that this is a game, a very rigged game. But we have all fallen prey in one way or another to stories of supremacy that take the shape of social norms. Tia wrote her books to help people leave situations like hers and to explain the religious extremism that for decades has been increasingly shaping U.S. politics. She writes and speaks about how living your life shouldn't be about disappearing yourself, making yourself small, or calling abuse love or God, that deconstruction and recovery are possible with a lot of patience, time, resilience, and hopefully no new gurus to replace the old ones. Now, if you hear a trickling water sound sometimes when Tia speaks, it is her very charming cat fountain. And last but not least, if you enjoy this fully independent, no-string budget podcast, please consider supporting it at the level of your choice at patreon.com/womenlikesex. Thank you. So I'm a gender-based violence reporter, and I spend a lot of time talking to people about the worst moments of their lives. And when I began reading A Well-Trained Wife that first night, I actually had a nightmare 3 or 4 chapters in.
Yeah.
How much did you have to work on not re-traumatizing yourself? As much as it's cathartic to get all this out, and I know you wanted to, also because you're offering a cautionary tale and helping others.
Right. Yeah, I think the important distinction is that I wrote to process my trauma. I did not publish to process my trauma. It started as therapeutic journals, I was trying to name my experiences and build out the scenes of who was there, what else was going on, what role did I play? What role did someone else owe me that they didn't, provide? This was a 10-year process. So at some point it became a narrative that I wanted to share. And then as politics changed, I realized I almost had a duty to share it. It felt like I had a calling to share it. At that point, I had processed so much of the trauma that I was ready to publish it. I just really see those as two distinct, really different things. I encourage everybody to write about their trauma to process it. I do not encourage everyone to publish.
Right. Right. Fair point.
Yeah.
From the beginning, did you know that you were going to narrate the book, or was there any suggestion from the publishing company in the beginning to not?
Yeah, I think the way the standard contract is written is that authors are given an opportunity to audition, because not every author is a good reader. I always wanted to read mine. I couldn't imagine someone else capturing the nuances of the story with the vocal performance. There are some really talented vocal actors out there, but I knew I needed to tell it. I was nervous about it, but it ultimately was an extremely freeing and liberating experience for me that I wanted to speak it and say it with my own voice.
I was thinking about that as I was listening. I say I read the books, but I listened to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was important to me also because the whole point of your story and of your sharing it is to reclaim your voice.
Right. Exactly. It felt like a no-brainer. Like you worked that hard to reclaim your voice. And for me, that included vocal retraining because I used this baby voice in fundamentalism and had come into my own sound and my own power. And I was like, of course I have to be the one that reads my story. That would just be almost hypocritical to have someone else read it.
There were so many things that resonated with me, which on the surface of it might seem odd because I grew up probably diametrically opposed to how you did in an atheist household with parents who taught me to question authority. To their chagrin, because that included theirs, and they've never
Right?
they've never liked
As
that.
it should.
Yeah.
As it should.
When you talk about in I Belong to Me, the twin of voice and sex.
Yeah.
If you can't own your body and if you can't own your sex and your sexuality, then how can you own your voice? And that is, I hadn't thought to put it in those words, but that's the underlying goal of this entire project, to establish how we can establish all the ways in which female sexuality has been repressed, who benefits from that, why it's been repressed, how it's been repressed, and then reclaiming it and establishing female agency and just establishing that women like sex just as much as men do. Some more, some less. And in doing that, then we establish female agency and hopefully tear down it's not going to happen in my lifetime, I know that, but the kind of boys will be boys BS.
Oh, I hope. I mean, that doesn't do a service to boys either.
Yeah.
One-dimensional masculinity or one-dimensional expectation doesn't serve either gender. For me, voice and sexuality are expressions that are so intertwined that they were absolutely interconnected. And I think that, especially as we talk about the Epstein crisis, or we talk about, the way we have pedophilia culture in America, along with this expectation that sweet women, kind women are also childlike women. And why would the patriarchy want women to sound like little girls and then tell her that as an adult, she's supposed to be, pleasing to her husband and a freak in the bed and all of the things? She doesn't know how to be that empowered because her entire psyche has been one to pull down, pull back, stay young, stay small, stay quiet, and stay sweet. And that when you move into maturity, you move into adulthood, you're going to sound like a woman. You're going to look like a woman. You're going to fuck like a woman. It's like they go together hand in hand. And so healing really meant reclaiming that and calling it out very vocally.
You're talking about the patriarchy, and I think of it as a disease. Supremacy is a disease. Yeah, right. And reading A Well-Trained Wife, I was struck for the godzillionth time about how the fuel that drives patriarchy, as with any socially constructed power imbalance, has to be hatred, right? You have to dehumanize when you're taught to and expected to subjugate someone else.
Yeah.
And in terms of patriarchy and in terms of men, how can you love yourself? How can you like yourself if the objects, we don't even have to talk about loving someone else, but if the objects of your desire and your companionship and half the world are subhuman, right. It's this endless loop. And it's so much more nuanced, the treating of the disease, than the hurt people saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it well in your sentence just right there. If a human being is an object of desire to you, you've already dehumanized them. So it's like teaching boys and girls that women are not objects and that they are autonomous human beings. It's not compatible in high control religion because they don't teach autonomy. They teach dependency and perpetuation of their system. And humans are used to keep the system going. You're supposed to each one reach one, evangelize, or make sure that you raise your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, which means you're teaching them indoctrination from a very young age so that they will grow up to become people who also have children and raise their children in the system. And that becomes tantamount, more so than their humanity or their autonomous rights as people or their free agent choice, when they become an adult and get to decide those things for themselves, they're not even equipped to make those decisions because they haven't been developed. They haven't gone through the accurate child development phases to be an autonomous adult, to know how to know their own mind and what they like and what they believe. And so when you come out of that, it's a big flip and mindfuck, because I couldn't even answer what I wanted for dinner, or what my favorite color was, or what I wanted, in the larger sense of the country, or the larger sense of my personal life and choices. And so healing all of that meant like going back to childhood and the things that I should have learned as a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 13-year-old who's learning to say, no, I don't, rebel a little. There's a purpose in that differentiation that happens in adolescence, and high control religion removed it. So then you end up with a childlike person who doesn't know how to conduct themselves like an adult.
I think underlying all of that is the same messaging that all girls and women get, and boys and men. It's taken to such an extreme. There are so many women. And I was speaking to a therapist this week about how we repress female sexual pleasure. She's like, but that's tied to how we repress female pleasure to begin with.
Right.
When you grow up in a systemic inequity like patriarchal norms, for so many women, I know so many people who didn't grow up in high control situations, yes, because again, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, those are high control situations, without sort of the underlying religious aspect, which just compounds it all the more, who still are like, well, but cooking and cleaning, you're supposed to do. What's wrong with you? Me, that I don't. I was like, well, if I had all the power, I would immediately deem those to be men's roles, men's jobs, because I don't like them, and having children, and how many children. And when it became too late for it, people stopped telling me to do it. But before, it was like, you have to do it. Right. This is what defines you.
I was just listening to Erica Kirk's Turning Point speech, and her position is that women owe a child to society. You owe society your contribution that women alone can offer, which is a baby. So it's such a different attitude towards someone who's deciding whether or not to have children. For many, many reasons why they might do that. To your point about high control and the religious influence, it's really tricky in America, where you might not have a religious home, but you are still impacted by a religiously tainted society. And I think that's coming through in people who relate to my book in ways that they're like, I didn't grow up in this, and like, oh, wait a minute, but I felt it touch my life, and this is how. And she's showing me how society's been shaped by this religious pressure and these religious norms. And we're seeing it so much in government now, where the beliefs of one sect is now impacting everything, all of our laws, all of our ruling bodies. Like forced Bible reading in Texas, like that's not something that's constitutionally correct. Right. They're getting away with it because of religious influence on the culture.
Oh, yeah. So I was born in Yugoslavia, but I was 4 when I moved to the US, and then lived in Italy for a long time. And it had always bothered me that presidents in America have to end with "God bless America" every speech that they give. And then it really started bothering me because everybody outside of the States makes fun of us for that. They're like, what's wrong with you? It's a secular country. You're a constitutional republic. You're not a Christian state. It's like, oh, you have no idea. To the point where once when I was a kid visiting Italy, I remember asking my friends, is Italy a religious country? And everyone just looked at me like, what's wrong with you? Like, God's representative on earth lives here. Like, as far as we're concerned. But I didn't know anybody who went to church in Italy. Of all my 16 years I lived there, one friend, and I met him here in Nashville, one friend grew up having to go to church until he was 16. And then he said, no, not going to do it. I almost didn't have friends here who didn't go to church. I mean, I also had a lot of friends who were foreigners. My dad's a physicist. So we always had, and they gravitated to other non-Americans. So there you
had smart people around you. Yes.
Give and take.
Yes.
More or less. Being good at science doesn't necessarily make you
right. That's a good point.
Smart at other things, but
they're not all intellectuals, right?
Even intellectuals are still imbibed with patriarchal norms, right?
Yes.
But in terms of the West, the global North and Europe, like the difference to me was massive. Like, I mean, I remember even when I was a kid on Long Island, I was 10 years old. Was it 5th grade, 6th grade? My principal overheard me saying that I don't believe in God. I had my best friend at the time was Catholic, and the times I have gone to mass is when I'd spend the night on Saturdays. And it always bugged me because I was like, we have to get up even earlier than when we go to school. And he overheard me and pulled me into his office. I was like, do you worship the devil? You all are communists. I'm like, I don't know anything about communism either. Like, I grew up in this country. I don't really know what you're talking about.
Right.
And we were so non-religious that I asked my mom one time what religion we were around that time. It would have been 5th, 6th grade.
Yeah.
And jokingly, she said, we're Muslim. And I was like, okay. And so I went around telling everybody we're Muslim.
Oh dear.
Until that same friend's dad was like, it's really interesting. I study religions. Like, I'd love to talk Islam with you. My mother's like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But because you would do so much work on this, like,
Mhm.
well, first of all, what was your journey in dismantling the patriarchy from your own body?
I mean, I would say I still do that all the time because we're surrounded in it. And as much as even last week, I posted this thing on social media. Would you surrender your right to vote to improve your marriage? And I asked that question because that's what was poised at this Turning Point USA conference. They were selling this idea that if you disagree with your husband on politics, that you could be hurting your marriage. And so, you want to strengthen your marriage. You want to, surrender your potential opposition to him, and let him vote for you. And it's all part of this push to instill head of household voting and ultimately disenfranchise women. And someone called me out on it, or called the question out rather, and said, why would he give up his vote to improve our marriage? And I was like, oh, see, I even just took that as an assumption. Like, that's how deeply it's embedded,
Right.
that if someone's sacrificing rights, it's automatically going to be women. That's embedded patriarchy in my life. So I started with it hurts. I just knew, like, I had narrowly escaped this abuse in 2007. I narrowly escaped with my kids. It was a near murder suicide, and it was extremely traumatic. And all I knew at that time, that what we had been doing was painful and that I couldn't disappear more or I would die. So I had to build up from there. And that meant every single time I encountered whether I was going to support my life or a system, and I chose myself each time, every time I did that, I was dismantling some level of patriarchy in my body, dismantling it in my family. I was bucking narratives. I was finding other ways to be and live, because I had given so much of my life to the point of almost dying to support systems. I had been taught, it was better to die than get divorced. And my story really pushes that question all the way to the end. Are you willing to die rather than get divorced? And I wasn't. I escaped. So, it's really from the ground up, starting at 33.
Oh, God. Well, you're talking about that. I was thinking of in I Belong to Me when you talked about, and I can't remember her name, the writer who's basically teaching women to be good, heavy air quotes, good wives,
Yeah.
and submit. It's like, and if you have suicidal thoughts, if you
Mhm.
have homicidal thoughts, just kind of brush them away. Don't buy that gun. Don't hurt yourself. Instead of leave, run. If your
Right.
relationship is causing you to think about ending your life or ending someone
Yeah.
else's.
Yeah, that's Martha Peace, and her book is The Excellent Wife, and it's extremely popular in evangelical churches. It has been for the past 50 years. And, she's getting replaced now. She's old. Her book's been, through some criticisms, and these young influencers are now taking the place of that advice. And so now we hear, 20-year-olds giving advice. Savannah Stone is the latest to hit the circuit. She's 20 and she wants to tell you how marriage works. She's been married for a year. She doesn't have any children yet. And she thinks that suffrage was a plant by the CIA. The CIA didn't even exist when suffrage began.
Right,
So,
right.
what does she know? She's a plant. She herself is a conservative influencer for that point. But, there are several big accounts online that teach women how to be less abusable or how to stay in abuse. And I tried that for a long time. I tried to make myself more pleasing and less abusable. And the abuse continued because we weren't holding the abuser accountable.
It won't if accountability doesn't fall where it should.
Right.
In society throughout, when you hear all of these tips on how not to be raped, how not to be sexually assaulted,
Right.
it's like, well, wear different clothing and, wear nail polish that detects roofies, and walk home in pairs and carry a whistle, and, always have your finger on your phone to dial 911. That's not, I did a story for Nashville Public Radio. This was a few years back now about, there's a traveling UN exhibit called What Were They Wearing? And it's, there's baby pajamas. It's mostly just jeans and t-shirts. And I ended it by saying, the way to prevent sexual assault is not to do all of these things that I just mentioned, but to not sexually assault someone. And my very good human male editor, who I would be genuinely surprised, I always say, if I found out that he did, because You're a
Yeah,
woman. It's not even a radar. It's just a built-in GPS system of,
exactly.
of understanding predatory behavior
Hmm.
and not being surprised by it. And I would genuinely be surprised. But his response was, oh, that's a really interesting take on this. It's like, it's not a take. Like, the way to not, be burgled isn't to live in a wood hut, with
Right.
absolutely nothing.
Good metaphor. Yeah, exactly.
We never do stories that question why people have nice things.
Yeah. What was she driving?
Look at what you were driving. Case closed. I'm not even going to write a report on it. Um,
Oh my God.
But also to reframe the trauma in a way to also be, as I say, data informed, because if the numbers are so high, then we don't need to be asking people all the time, what does it feel like to have been abused?
Right.
Sexually, physically, psychologically, financially? It feels like shit.
I so agree. It's hard as a survivor to be the one doing the talking. I would so much rather have some data forward and some repositioning and some learning from the mistakes and the patterns. One of the most fatiguing pieces of this is that we have to repeat ourselves so much, and people still are like, tell me the basics. And it's like, oh my goodness, when are we going to advance to the next step and say, okay, well, we see this pattern and now we are going to make changes. We are going to, and America has a problem with that in several categories. We don't like learning from our mistakes and changing our patterns. We like repeating patterns.
I would argue that coming from a country that fell apart in civil war.
Okay, that's fair. You have a wider, broad, worldview.
Yugoslavia, after the French, had the largest resistance movement in World War II. And yet we had the bloodiest civil war of the 20th century in Europe. So yeah, we humans do this, but I think a lot of that has to do with precisely what we're talking about when we teach history, for example. And we teach, I remember learning about World War II. There was an economic crash and that somehow created a vacuum, and then Hitler rose to power. Or teaching, learning American history, and you teach all of these theaters of war. It's like, unless you're going to Annapolis, right, or West Point, or you're going to go into the military forces, I don't need to know. I don't care how battles are fought and won. But if you can learn to recognize how a dictator comes to power, how the abnormal is normalized with the complicity of news media as well. Right. It's just when something is repeated over and over and over again, it just becomes normal. You pull the fringes into the mainstream. And that's your point of what we're seeing in the government. When people ask me, like, how is this possible? It's like, I'm actually surprised it hasn't happened before. At least in modern history, because there were certainly a lot of religious leaders in America, pre our lifetime. Like, I even think about it in schools. I did not pledge allegiance to the flag. I refused to in middle school on Long Island, and I got pulled into the principal's office for that. I was like, I'm not a citizen. I wasn't then. Right. I didn't become a citizen until my 20s. And also, I was like, my parents really would rather I didn't, because that's the kind of things that you do in a dictatorship. Why do you need to pledge allegiance? And also to one nation under God, like all of it.
Yeah, I love that, because I had the natural skepticism as a kid where I would question it, but then I would always answer with like, well, this is what we're supposed to do, because I was being shaped and formed into obedience culture, and exact opposite from, your self-assertion and your pushing back and all of that, that's the outcome. But to your point, the long game, this is what we're seeing today, is such a long game that they've had. And so I think 40, 50 years ago, you still had a pretty educated base that could hold critical thought. They could push back. They cared about the Constitution. There was mainline denominations in charge. Now we have the fringe people in charge, and they've worked really hard over the last 40 years to get this nationalism in place. And there's an entire infrastructure and multiple tiers of it, and then we have the influence online along with the legislation and the structure that they're doing, behind the scenes that are really going to change things. Like, you can change what's trending, like a hashtag can trend quicker, but when we're changing laws and we're, making decisions against the electorate and against democracy, that's going to take years to repair. And we aren't even through the damage phase yet. So, it's such a long road.
At the Parnassus event, I was struck by two things. One, the deep amount of pain that people feel and how much they bond with your books, and how important it is for them to have somebody who's come out and through resilience and through kind of a not systemic, but systematic work of dismantling. But also you said, you see the fever breaking, that you see this kind of evangelical fever fever breaking. I wish I was optimistic, but I'm also not in that. So I'd love to know what evidence you see from that. Like what?
Yeah. So, okay. So some of that is my traumatized nervous system. It notices hypervigilance. It notices details. It notices subtle things. And the first thing that I started noticing was silence on the part of MAGAs close to me. I am close still to a lot of people who voted 3 times for Donald Trump, and they are quiet because they're not liking it. That is always a tell when the high control evangelical parent goes silent. You know you're in trouble. And I was like, oh, okay, I see. They don't know how to get out of this. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what to do about it. But I could tell at that point, okay, this is cracking. And that was about just after the election, almost a year ago now. So it's accelerating. Now we have accounts online. There's an account called Leaving MAGA, and we have people deconstructing openly. And I know several people who have left and are now critics of the administration. So I think that that's going to be contagious. His ridiculosity has grown to an amount that they can no longer justify. Now that's just one person. That doesn't it doesn't have to do with the whole system that's behind him and under him. And but I think that it gives us a chance for some kind of breakthrough that would hold the administration itself accountable. It gives us hope for people having tried this on for size and realized, no, actually, we don't want to go backwards. No, actually, this did let too much slide. They're seeing, data centers show up in their neighborhoods. So they're seeing, like the impacts of having this tech open door, coming at them, different things that impact people's personal lives. And so it is slow, and it's going to have an engine that, slowly churns and gets momentum going. And some of that, we can speed it up if we fan the flame, if we learn to support. But my big thing that I learned in recognizing this was that the left and the people who are in the center and who have never voted for Trump are not ready to receive people who have changed their minds. We're still really angry. We're still really hurting. It's active, ongoing hurt. And the idea that you can just kind of change your mind and blend back into society is not going to be so easy this time. I think we have pockets of people who are taking a hard look at that didn't work after the Confederacy. That is why we're here in a large part, because we let the Southern states kind of just slink back into society, and we didn't eradicate those views like Germany did after the Nazis fell. And so there's going to need to be a different approach taken if we're really truly going to eradicate this. And I think that's the question mark. America's call to courage. Are you going to just kind of do business as usual and hope this sort of settles out? Or are you going to pointedly call out these mistakes and apply remedies? I think that will depend a lot on how midterms go, how much the Democratic Party wants to form some sort of cohesiveness, because right now they don't seem to have it, and what happens in the middle.
Yeah. I don't think you can ever eradicate it fully, but just marginalize it.
Yeah, you can make it unpopular to be openly racist.
You can make it.
you can make people ashamed to fly their Confederate flag. You can make people quiet about it again. And I'm not satisfied with that. When I realized that, like, the Jim Crow era white people just went to church, they just stayed quiet. That's led to MAGA. That's led us here. I'm not satisfied with just be quiet and slurk away. I also know that accountability isn't first. That's not how cult breaking works. Cult breaking is slow and incremental and highly personal, and accountability is just not the first step. It's much later down in the game, and it's when people are ready to see their complicity on both sides. Like, we don't know what to call them, progressives, whatever we want to call them, also played a part in this happening.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's going to play into whatever accountability conversation we have.
My grandfather was a politician. He was a mayor and a governor and then a member of parliament in Yugoslavia. And I remember when I was 19, so this was before the Balkan War, right before. And I remember him telling me, and I didn't understand it then, when you hear your lefty friends saying that all politicians are the same, you can bet everything you own that the ultra-right is coming to power. Just pray. Yep. And he was not a religious man. He's just like, just pray they're not armed. And I remember not understanding that, not knowing what he meant until years later. And then it's Gore v. Bush.
Yeah.
And lefty friends saying, I'm not going to vote because they're the same. And I was like, well, the only thing that's the same about them are 4-letter last names.
Right.
Like everything in life is nuance. And if there's someone that represents you 32% and someone that represents you 23%, you vote for the person that represents you. But this complicity on, I don't think it's both. I think it's more than both. It's all sides. It's everybody.
Yeah. We need an American reckoning.
Which America's not been good at. The Germans were good at saying, we
That's
did this.
true.
Like when they came out of World War II, they're like, we're going to teach this and we're going to say that this is what we did, not just our like grandparents and parents, but we collectively. And you have to understand that you will be doing, we're all capable of doing this. And in America, we're still in some areas debating and fighting whether enslavement of humans was really that bad. And did it really happen? Or, yeah, okay, it happened, but we're not going to talk about it.
Right. That's what I'm from. I'm from people who liked to talk about the benevolent slave owners and how the slaves were really pretty happy. They had it pretty good. And it would be okay if we went back to that. And unfortunately, the class warfare system is going to put us back to something like that. The quiverful ideology, the big families, the MAGA, the tradwife, cults, pronatalism, that is to grow white dominance. That's not to grow all dominance, all big families. They're going to have the brown families be the labor force and the white families will be the ones in the top classes. And they're very threatened by replacement theory, which is, this idea that immigrants and brown people are going to remove the white majority. And they've been fighting actively against that my whole life. Like that's part of my story. That's a through line in my story since early childhood.
Yeah.
So I take it really seriously.
Which is Incel 101.
Yeah. Right.
They do these horrific acts of mass violence and they write manifestos and you don't have to scratch far beneath the surface. There might be 300 pages and by page 3, you're like, they will replace us. And the reason that we're being replaced is women. Right. Women are in the workforce. Women aren't having babies and they need to be doing this and we need to dominate. And I'm mad. And also, I shower and comb my hair and brush my teeth and nobody wants to have sex with me. And,
I stumbled one day on an actual debate on men who were deciding if they needed to wipe their butts. Do you just poop and stand up or do you actually wipe? And I was like, I'm leaving the internet now. I'm turning them off my phone today.
For my part, I'm always saying we need bidets. We have one of those little hookup things.
Once you go bidet, you never
go back. And all my friends in Europe are or around the world are like, Americans, you just walk around. You think you're civilized. You just walk around with these dirty asses. And when people say, well, that's gross, or why would you do that? I'm like, there's no other part of your body that if you had feces on it, if I had it on my arm, I'd be like, I'm just going to take a paper towel. I'm done.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
I'm not going to wash it off. But yeah, But I wanted to go back sort of in all of this from some larger scale, larger scale work you're doing to your children. How did you teach your children? I mean, high control religion and some Venn diagrams, depending on what you're talking about, and domestic and intimate partner violence are like one circle. The dynamics are the same, right? And you take it to even greater and it's dictatorship, right? It's just scale. It's a question of scale. And also who you're saying is making you do or allowing you do the things you do.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, which reminds me I had to just stop A Well-Trained Wife when you got to the part about spanking as correction for women. It's just like this. If you want kink, BDSM consensually, fine. Go with all the gods.
Sure.
That's fine.
Sure. I learned that from the kink community. I learned that what I lived through wasn't kink because kink has consent and I didn't have any consent. And so for listeners that don't know what that means, Christian domestic discipline, which is wife spanking and disciplining women like you do little children, in the spanking high control religion atmosphere, that's what that is. And so I was spanked like a child. And it's a low point in the story. It's very visceral part of the story.
As it should be.
Yes, but it's also an open secret. Like the parenting books that teach parents how to use corporal punishment with their children have no age limit. And when you listen to survivors, you hear older daughters talking about how they were spanked into older teenage years. And I get Me Too statements all the time, letters from women who were also spanked from their husbands. And I just knew when I wrote A Well-Trained Wife, I was going to tell that truth. I was shocked that I was going to tell that truth, but I knew I couldn't tell the story without going there and including it. Was hard to talk about, but it's necessary. And I always hear people say it's like The Handmaid's Tale. And I always point out, okay, first of all, Margaret Atwood wrote the Handmaid's Tale based on everything that really had happened. That's true. And before there was Gilead, there was an America that was ready to be Gilead. And that is what we're living in through right now, is this rise of a high control Christian patriarchy that wants a theocracy that is demonstrated through the fiction of Gilead. It's important to know and important to pay attention. To your question about what I taught my children are really kind of a sociology experiment following the arc of my healing,
Right.
because they were parented one way in early childhood. And then when we escaped, I changed it all. I put them in public school. We went to therapy. I changed my parenting. I didn't spank them. I still, like, they're all in their 20s now, and I still consider myself an active parent because I'm still either making a living amends for the way that they were raised, but also trying to work, with them and how we're healing and how we confront different issues and legacy things that are still part of that. A lot of the things that we deal with today got their start, 20 years ago, and we're still living with the damages and the ramifications of that. So the only way I know to do it is to treat them like human beings, understand child rights, and really talk through everything. Like, we're not under any control regime, and we're not under any ideology that we're serving more than our humanity. And so we talk it out. We don't rush it. We work towards mutual understanding. It's hard because my sons are growing up, in post-COVID manosphere influence, which is awfully triggering for what we came from when they were young children.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
There's no one size fits all approach to emerging from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
What were your knots, your nodes, sort of the phases? What did that look like? And how do you know when it's time to change therapists? Because not every practice is going to work for everybody.
Yeah, and that's exactly true. When I started, we didn't even really talk that much about trauma-informed therapists. We didn't talk about religious trauma. We didn't have names for a lot of the things that are now like just hashtags, like we just talk about it. Complex PTSD wasn't really being talked about in a religious context. And so a lot of times I was learning with my therapists, I was outgrowing them. The phases, like I had a long extended period of being in shock and in the aftermath of tremendous shock, and had to learn how to respect and honor what that season is. I Belong to Me is written like a spiral, so that the first half of the book is like the baby steps that I was taking in the beginning of learning what to call my trauma, what I had been through, years after experiencing it most of the time, but not knowing what to do next. And then the back half of the book is really what I call like graduate level healing, like when you're really like, you've done your basic work and you've got a pretty good grip on what you've been through, but you don't know how to go forward, and you're trying to go forward. You're trying to get at the deeper next level of things so that you aren't held back by this story of the past constantly, and that you have a more developed sense of self, so that you can reach back to younger you and actually rescue yourself. There's a lot to the back half of the book that I just are all more graduate phases that I warn people, like, this isn't necessarily a book to read in one setting, because you may find yourself finding many stopping places. And I wrote it to be approachable wherever you are. We all do come from it, from very different places and very personal needs. And so it's okay to hop, skip, and jump around the book. Like, if there's a topic that really speaks to you and one that not so much, this isn't like a linear path. This is not a set of steps that I took, a magic formula to follow. It is very much take what you like and leave the rest. And so I think that's reflected in the story. But the practical question of how to know when you've outgrown a therapist, I really compare it to when I was a kid. I was a smart kid. I always read. I was, pretty sharp in the class. And I could always tell when I was smarter than the teacher, or when I had learned everything that they could offer me and it was time to go somewhere else and grow. It really feels that way. It feels like, okay, you've taken me as far as you can take me. A couple times those therapists switch had conflicts attached to them, such as I discovered one therapist actually had a deep-seated religious faith that she was nervous I was violating. And I had another therapist that triangulated with a family member and was no longer working in my interest anymore.
Like they reached out without your consent to a family member.
We had a joint session and they sided against me in the session in a flirtatious way with my partner.
Oh.
And it was very violating and destroyed quite a bit of work that I had done with that therapist. But I also learned that therapists are human, They come with all their flaws in their baggage. The therapy field itself is fraught with people who've been through shit, who became therapists in order to deal with
Yeah.
that. And so your healing discretion matters. Your intuition and your instinct and your sense of safety with them matters. And it's totally valid to audition therapists and, see if you're a match with a chemistry standpoint. And it's also valid to recognize, okay, I've exhausted their skill set, their expertise, and it's time to go find somebody who specializes in this new modality I want to explore. Like when I went to EMDR, I had to find an EMDR therapist because they actually get credentialed in those modalities, and it's really important to find somebody that matches where you are and where you want to go. I think cognitive behavior therapy kind of has, I don't know if it's getting better, but it for a long time had a reputation with people who would just go to therapy, talk therapy for, years on end with no exit strategy. And that's not advancing. That's just stagnating. So sometimes that's a factor too.
Yeah, it depends. I feel like CBT, cognitive behavior, it depends very much on what a person's own end goal is.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like you said, it comes down to the therapist. And one of the reasons why I was asking you was partly because of my work. How do we find language that we within therapy and psychiatry, the same systems that are the foundations of high control religion, that are the foundations of gender injustice, have also defined our understanding of psychology and psychiatry. And a lot of the language that we use still pathologizes victims and survivors. And something that I've been asking therapists and have not found one psychiatrist. There's research that shows that like borderline personality disorder is from this UK psychiatrist, that the vast majority of women who are diagnosed with it are survivors of sexual violence. And we talk about sexual dysfunction among rape survivors or people coming out of high control religions. Like, well, you're functioning exactly as you're supposed to if you've been shamed and you're now ashamed. And I will ask them, so what's the disease that rapists have? What's the disease? And they're like, well, social. I'm like, no. You have a disorder name for the person who's come out of this. So what's the disorder name? What's the disease name? Because arguably, as I keep saying, like, rape has to be the greatest sexual dysfunction there is. Raping someone.
Yeah.
And the greatest personality disorder at thinking that you can and doing it. How do we move that language? Like who have you found in the spaces that you've worked in or researched?
Oh, this is a hard question because I really try to decenter personalities. I got good at taking what I like and leave the rest. That's a 12-step rule, and I have applied it so much, mostly to avoid following a new guru. It's very important for cult survivors to not replicate that power structure and to find the answers in another magic expert. And so I have carried that into my therapy approach, there's a lot of issues because like some of our biggest therapeutic greats have scandalous pasts that surface or really misogynistic teachings that come forward. And I am very fascinated at this idea of over pathologizing conditions. I think it's going to be a factor when we have so many people coming out of the cult break and we have so many therapists who are not skilled in recognizing religious trauma and how that manifests, and they misappropriate or misdiagnose the behavior. That's kind of what I've been drumming on lately, is being able to recognize it for what it is and to see how it replicates and not just put an old label on it and say, oh, well, this is borderline personality disorder, to your point of, because this is how sexual trauma manifests in women. I'm also really sensitive to the awareness that the DSM and the trauma responses that we recognize is all based on male research.
Yeah.
And the male manifestation of trauma and the female manifestation of trauma looks different. And we don't know enough about that. And this is in the same culture that just mapped the clit in 1993 and just came out with a 3D model of the clit in 2023.
So the mapping, the proof of it.
Me.
So 98 was when, so my first guest on the podcast, Dr. Helen O'Connell, she's the Australian urologist who did that. She wrote the paper in 98. Proved it in 2005. So I keep saying the clit turned 21 this year. She can finally go into a bar in America and buy herself a drink. And the first 3D model was printed in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, by a French woman who then made I think they call them recipes, the formula for 3D printing. Like an open source thing. And I have one. Well, I have many. And I even have a very large painting of it.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
My boyfriend did that.
Correcting my math.
My boyfriend did that when I co-hosted the Vagina Monologues years ago, which I would love to talk to Eve Ensler and say, can you just change that to the clit monologues? to the
Yeah.
vulva. Can we stop calling it by the wrong name? By that which gives
Right.
men pleasure in
Good
heterosex?
point.
But
Yeah.
what advice do you offer for people coming out of high control religions and high control situations? Let's say it's domestic violence, intimate partner violence, where they have been taught to doubt themselves, right? It has been drummed into you. That is the whole point of it. Like they feed
Right.
abusers. They might say they feed on your love, but they don't. They feed on your self-doubt more than anything. From that place of self-doubt, when you've been traumatized and hurt that deeply, how
Mhm.
do you then not go, not reach for another system?
Right. So I had to give myself a timeout. I think that is an important point. A lot of people reach for the next group. They reach for the next relationship because their nervous system finds comforting. They're lonely. There's a lot of reasons for that. But I gave myself a no. You're gonna figure this out so that you don't repeat cycles. You're not gonna fall for this again. And I kind of wanted to predator proof my life. The only thing that's really different in those two scenarios that you laid out, that between religious motivation and not, is that the self-doubter in the religious context is armed with scriptures that has like tainted you to lean not on your own understanding
Right.
and trust God, over yourself. And it's their version of God that you're supposed to trust, not yourself. So I had to heal my intuition and heal my ability to self-trust. And the reason why I felt I could do that was because I was the one holding the bag for the consequences if it went wrong. I had paid dearly enough to know that, okay, if I'm going to be the one that's holding whatever comes of this, then I'm going to have buy-in, and I'm going to have to not just take in someone else's word for it, because I've tried that and it almost killed me multiple times.
Right.
They don't have my best interest in mind. I am the only person who can really have my best interest in heart. And I didn't know how to trust myself. So it is a big chunk of I Belong to Me is learning how I did that and how to um, heal your sense of intuition, hear yourself, understand what your perceptions are telling you, and then believing yourself. And I had to start in baby steps. It's very little things. But if I can't trust myself in a little thing, I can't trust myself in a big thing. And I'll always, habitually hand over my power in that instance. So if I'm going to reclaim my power and I had to start like a baby, like learning how to walk again, learning how to talk again. Those are baby steps, literally. And,
Right.
my very first one was learning how to say ouch when I was hurt.
Yeah.
Because I had been conditioned out of acknowledging my pain. I would just push through my pain and suck it up and ignore it. And that actually had to start with something even smaller, which was like, let yourself go to the bathroom when you have to go to the bathroom. Don't work through your urge to pee. Don't deny yourself a bathroom stop because someone else's comfort comes first, And so like those little tiny training steps build and accumulate in your brain, and you learn to self-prioritize and honor your body.
I think that's extremely important for people to understand, to hear, to understand, because we think we want to get ahead of ourselves necessarily and think of these big picture.
Right.
For me, I remember that like the catharsis of asking someone for help with the partner I'm with now. And I had wanted him to come, and it was a routine thing at the hospital. I just had been doing everything by myself for so long and didn't ask and couldn't ask and struggled.
Right.
And then afterwards, just the breakdown of like, I just wanted you to come. And he was like, I was going to, but you just never seemed to want anyone there. And everyone else around me was like, well, that's strange, because if you just have to go to the doctor, yeah, your partner comes with you. I'm like, it's small to you.
It's small to you, but if you haven't been taught that when you ask for help, that you will be helped, you learn to stop asking for help.
Yeah.
Yeah. That fierce independence is learned behavior. We're not usually born with it, because as babies, we reached out to be picked up, and we either got picked up or we weren't,
Yeah.
we learned that really, really, really young.
I wanted to ask you, I know we're almost out of time, and it's a loaded question. I get that, but you
Mhm.
speak about personality tests and their
Yeah.
importance to you, and full disclosure, they're not important to me.
Okay.
I'm like the Energizer Bunny of explaining to people in the Myers-Briggs, like Briggs was a highly racist woman who wrote that noir novel that she wrote about a Southern family killing itself when they found out they have Negro blood in them.
Oh.
Yeah. And the whole Myers-Briggs thing is based on Jungian theory to begin with, that he himself had discredited, and in the disability space, there's a lot of pushback against them because they don't usually take into account. But I am curious, in your just the establishing of personality, the be able to say like, I have this personality that comes out so strongly in the book, in both books, but in I Belong to Me, you come back to it.
Right.
You're walking us. It's like both a guide and a postmortem is how I looked at it.
Good point. Personality tests are important to me as a concept. I'm not very good at any specific one. Like I would even sometimes have to ask somebody, what are my letters again? What is my number? Because I can't keep up with it and I'm not good at knowing all the types and, all of that. What I used them for was a period of self-discovery when I didn't know myself at all, because I had morphed and lost so much of myself in systems and what they said I should be. I didn't know who I was before that. And that's the central question of I Belong to Me, of who was I before they told me who I had to be. I had no clue. And so I think this is a really great point to call back to the no guru thing. I didn't know that about Briggs, but I am familiar with, again, psychologists who are then later found to have quite problematic behaviors that would keep me from recommending them. And so it's like a when you know better, you do better thing. I don't endorse or hawk systems like that, but I have used them in the past when I didn't know that. I'm an Enneagram 4. I don't really know what the other types are. But it's helpful for me to remember that according to that personality test, I'm a very emotive person. I feel my big feelings, and that's about as far as I take the Enneagram. I feel like today I'm just Tia, and I say that a lot. I'm just Tia, and you'll know me and you'll know my character traits because of your interactions with me, not because I told you some combination of letters that I took on a test.
Which speaks to also all of the work that you've done after having suppressed emotions for so long. The last question ties back to a lot of this and it's a much bigger question. I realize this, and I'm like in 2 minutes or less, but when I was a kid and someone told me that the Bible was written by all men, I remember thinking, oh, well, then it can't be true. That's problematic. That can't be. That's not okay.
I love little Natasha so much.
Oh, I mean, so much of little Natasha has gotten me through so much of big Natasha's darkness. Yeah, and little Natasha also told, when we first moved to the U.S., we lived on the Upper West Side of New York, and my parents sent me to an Episcopalian private school, and I became literally a Bible thumper for a little bit at the age of 5, and telling my parents that they were going to go to hell because they weren't believers. I stand on my high chair. I was 5 years old in first grade, still sitting in a high chair. With my paperback Bible. It was about as big as my head. And because we swore a lot in my family, I would tell my parents they were fuck it. I thought that's how you said it. Fuck it idiots for not going, for not believing.
This is a great story.
And they would laugh, and then I'd get angrier and angrier.
Yes.
And then at some point, getting up early, I was not a morning person until my 40s, basically. And I just didn't want to go to chapel for half an hour before. And I got bored one day and I walked up to the altar, and Father John was delivering the sermon and just said, I just want to tell everyone there is no God, because my daddy said so. My God says your God doesn't exist. And I admit I have read so very little of it. And even one day when I was asking a colleague that I worked with at National Public Radio, and he said, well, really, if you want to read something, read, because I was going to do a story on scientists teaching science to religious people at churches here. And he was like, the gospel, Genesis and the Gospels are a good place to start. And there are a lot of beautiful writings in there. I was like, oh, the Gospels, which version, the Old Testament or the New Testament? And he just looked at me. It was like, oh, you don't know shit. I was like, I told you.
No, I love that. I love that. It's my thrill to meet people without a lot of religious indoctrination.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, right.
But from the perspective now of working with gender violence, like when I see those stories, all I can think of, who knows what these men were doing to the women and children in their lives and to other men in their lives. Like how, and because you do quote a lot of scripture, you do quote a lot. How do you find the beauty? How do you extricate the beauty from a lot of what it's steeped in, just from its origins?
Yeah. Most of my quoting of scripture is there to show what I thought about it at the time or what I have actively deconstructed. I do struggle with the use of scripture in any kind of beautiful context, because that overlooks and bypasses the harm that's been done as a result. So, it's weird when you spend 40 plus years of your life being taught not to question this book, and then finding very valid reasons to question that book. The importance, it's kind of just boring. It's like, okay, can we talk about another book now? Like,
Right.
Can we expand our worldview, please? I'm a well-read person. I would love to talk about any other book. I appreciate the role that it plays in people's lives. I appreciate the history of it and the poetry of it and the earnestness. The more I learn about how it's a tool of empire, the less appealing I find it. And the way that it's really abused and bastardized in America is repulsive to me. So, I, for better or for worse, know my scripture. And it comes out when I'm making arguments or sharing a story about deconstruction. This is a very common thing among my fellow deconstruction ex-evangelicals. We were raised on a lot of Bible and we know our Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And when people accuse us, like, well, you just didn't read it right or something like that. No, we know we've been beaten over this. We know this, and it's inescapable. So integrating it into the context of our lives is part of what we do to heal, but it doesn't have the same prominence that it once held. And I pretty much only use it today as a tool of appreciation with people who really value it.
Yeah, I like how you reframe or say, well, people quote this part of it, but actually.
Yeah. And very often what happens in sermons, and I have an example of this in I Belong to Me, where the pastor cites his interpretation of a verse and then backs it up with the chapter and verse that it's found in. And then if you check that, it doesn't even say what he said it said.
Right.
They're misquoting it. And the people are so conditioned not to question their pastor that they aren't looking it up for themselves and seeing, does that verse even say that? Like, is that what that's about? What context did that fall into? Who was that originally written for? What else was going on? Is there an alternative interpretation available? Like, those kinds of critical thinking questions were not welcome. So we have to teach them to ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that holds true also for secular writing. There was something that you said it, and I'm taking it, and I will quote you, that you like to study the etymology of assumptions. Yeah. I really like the phrasing of that. We all should, because so much of what we know, right, that we think we know, you're like, oh, this is completely wrong. And so for people who are seeking escape, who need to flee, who need to escape, and depending on the gravity of their physical situation, if they're at the end of the road, like you were, where the next step would have very likely been the last one, what resources do you point people to?
I always point people to their local DV shelter if they are in that much dire trouble. I waited until the last possible exit on the highway, and it almost cost us everything. I don't recommend that. So if you're feeling that inkling, I definitely felt that inkling for 6 to 8 months before it happened. And I could have gone to my DV shelter, and I ultimately ended up working with DV groups that they're equipped to a point, and they can get you started, they can get you safe, but more subtly, like if it's not so life and death and it's not so dire, start with books. It's hard to find like experts, and it's hard to find resources. We don't have great funding for that in the country, but we do have an entire deconstruction shelf now. We have had so many authors, so many memoirs, political commentary. There's so much there. Social media and hashtags and things. Like if you start searching religious trauma, ex-evangelical, put your exact question into the box, you will start getting resources back now. And I think that's one of the big progresses for the past 5 to 8 years, is that now we do have resources to turn to, and everybody comes at it from their own angle. So if you're still wanting like something with a lot of Christian worldview, you will find it. If you need something that is completely religion free, you will also find that. And then if you're looking for a therapist, make sure it's trauma-informed therapist, not necessarily religious trauma-informed, because those are very few and far between still, but a trauma-informed therapist can help with identifying PTSD and CPTSD, which is, complex and everyday, very important. And, you might not stay with them for the duration of your healing, but it's a starting place.
And for people looking for you on the internet,
finding my material is really easy. Both of my books are available anywhere books are sold, including the audio platforms. And I am at Tia Levings Writer on all the social platforms.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.
That was Tia Levings, best-selling author and survivor of extreme Christian patriarchy, among so many other things. You can find links to her books, socials, things and people we talked about, and the transcript of this conversation at the Women Like Sex episode, Undoing the Lord's Work, at womenlikesex.com/episodes. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Sinyanovich. Website design and artwork are by Ted Nunes. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, Please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.